Ary Rosenbaum here with another fun-filled episode of that 4K podcast. This week's topic, we're going to talk about the fiduciary reality check for 4K plan sponsors, but the idea of just push play, and we'll talk about why I love the term just push play. But of course, first things first, go to that 4ksite.com. We got further information on the National Virtual Conference. Will be the end of January. My son has told me that the MLB schedule for 2026 will be released on, by the time this episode drops, we'll know where we might be able to go. Tomorrow I'll have a call with Wrigley Field, and we'll see if we could go back there. We haven't been back there since 2018. I'm thinking no, based on remember what I paid in 2018 for the room, and there have been changes and all that stuff, and we'll see what happens. We'll let you know. There are a couple of cities I'm thinking about, but I think this time, after the whole Milwaukee debacle, we're going to talk to our sponsors and see where we should be, pursuing events that make sense for, people to attend and whatnot. But National Virtual Conference, it's free. Sign up. And, of course, that 4ksite.com, all the articles you've come to expect from me. I think by the time the episode drops, there'll be an article about my South Fork experience, the Dallas reunion event and all that kind of stuff. And, talk about Dallas and just push play. It's always funny, like in life, like the favorite things that I enjoyed, as a kid. The movies, the TV shows, it's always the same. My favorite TV show of all time, again, is Dallas. No matter how much I love Seinfeld and Curb and Sopranos and Breaking Bad and Better Call Saul, it's never going to equal, what, Dallas was. For movies, I think people know that my favorite movie of all time is Airplane. That has not changed since about the first time I saw that movie. I think the first time I saw that movie was on HBO in 1981, even though the movie came out in 80. And my favorite musical act of all time is Aerosmith. It's been that way since I was about 17 years old. The Pump album came out, and I saw the video for Love in an Elevator. It captivated me. I wanted to be as thin as Steven Tyler was, so at that time I went on a diet, lost 40 pounds, followed, all their music back from the beginning, and I've seen them, more than a dozen times. I haven't seen them in a very, very long time, and, now that they're not touring, I don't know if I'll ever see them again. And that's where the term Just Push Play comes out of. Just Push Play was an album that came out, I want to say, in 2001. Late 2001, I want to say, or early 2002. And I just love the title. And the title track is an amazing song. And at one point, the Full Circle book, which is available on Kindle and paperback, I thought about one time calling it Just Push Play. And that, that album and that title track is just something very, very unique. And it always reminds me, just push play, just do it. And, that's sometimes the role of the nature of being a fiduciary. Just push play. They're going to bleep it anyway. I think plan sponsors need to understand fiduciary duty, what it is and what it's not. And, you can't sit on pause. You have to push play and do your job. I think it's really important to understand the nature of fiduciary duty. And again, we have this thing called ERISA. It's been around since signed into law in 74, effective 1976. You're a fiduciary if you have discretionary authority or control over a retirement plan or its assets. I'm 53 years old. Hopefully before I retire, and I'm still debating whether I ever retire, hopefully they'll revise that fiduciary definition, but until then, that's what it is. The core duties of being a fiduciary are, having a duty of loyalty, a duty of prudence, a duty to diversify investments, as well as the duty to follow plain documents. Stick to the script as long as it aligns with ERISA. You signed up for it, whether you like to or not, and that's the nature of the job. As Angela Bassett said in Mission Impossible Fallout, that's the job. That's the nature of the job, of the duty. You wear, you're a plan sponsor, you're wearing multiple hats, you're wearing a fiduciary hat. No, but, and there are some common fiduciary flubs. We know them all. The set it and forget it mentality. It's too many sponsors treat their plan like a CD to left in the car stereo. I have two cars. I have a 2012 Prius, which I still have an iPod Classic, and I will be totally devastated when that thing will finally die because I refuse to use my iPhone as the music collection. And I had a computer issue years ago, so my iTunes isn't synced with what I have on the iPod, and I can't add anything to the iPod. And then with the 2012 Mazda 3, I used the Sirius radio, and my son, demands the Beatles channel on all day, all night. And speaking of the set it, forget it, there's some CDs that are still in the CD tray, from the car radio, and I haven't listened to it in quite some time. I think in the Mazda I still have like the Who, Tommy, and I forget what's in the Prius. For all I know, it's the Guardians of the Galaxy soundtrack. I don't know. But, the set it, forget mentality, we all know about that. You can't, put a plan in and just completely and utterly forget about it. You need to monitor performance, fees, and services regularly. Of course, the other problem, no committee, no minutes. Too often, plan sponsor will have a committee and do nothing about it. Have no minutes, never meet, all that kind of stuff. Kind of reminds me of my old college newspapers, alumni association, fundraising committee, which I was a part of. It lasted all of one meeting. We spent the majority of that meeting where two journalists were trying to debate me of whether selling T-shirts would get a hold of the unrelated business tax that certain non-for-profits might be subject to. And I joke about that because I did some work on unrelated business income tax. And selling T-shirts with the logo of the paper is an unrelated business income. But it didn't stop the journalists from wasting my time, and we never had a second meeting. But plan sponsors can't do that with their plan. They have that fiduciary duty to hold committee meetings and record the minutes and all the decisions. Next, plan sponsors certainly can't overpay without question. Fees do matter, but you don't need to pick the cheapest plan provider out there. But you need to understand what you're paying for and why. And, are those fees reasonable? Of course, plan sponsors detrimentally rely on salespeople a lot. There's a difference between, the situation, to understand what you're getting. And, it's important to get things right. Establish a fiduciary process, hire some smart people, benchmark everything, and of course, educating yourself. The process, it's important to have a process and to actually follow it. And to me, having a process and not following it is far worse than not having a process. Because, you show everybody that you intended to follow some sort of process, but you decided to breach that by just ignoring it completely. It's important always to hire smart people. Work with advisors who serve as fiduciaries in writing. Make sure you have TPAs that know what the heck they're doing. And don't assume in this business that bigger means better, because we know that that's not some of the cases. We know that's, a lot of the times the worst providers out there, or some of the biggest. Uh, you know, you just can't assume everything. It's important to benchmark everything. Uh, every service, every process, benchmark every few years and whatnot. And it's important to educate yourself. You don't need to be an ERISA expert. You don't need to be an ERISA attorney, but just ask questions and attend webinars, learn stuff on your own. Back in the old days, I remember as a kid, I always had to worry about everything, and it was like, as a kid, I'm like, how are you going to know how to do this to file for get your social security card or set up a business and all that stuff. And I was always worried, like, how is an adult, how am I ever going to know this? And then when I became an adult, there was this thing called the internet, and like everything is at your fingertips. One of my favorite things to do on the internet is to go to Wikipedia and learn things about history and fascination. Like if I hear about something and just type it up, or you just learn something new every day. And so as a plan sponsor, the information's out there in order to make to learn. I mean, a lot of times people contact me because they find an article that I wrote somewhere on JD Supra or my website or whatever it is, and they find information that I put out there that they can utilize. Toys in the Attics, and again, I think we could debate which are the greatest Aerosmith albums. So the Toys in the Attic, the hidden liabilities that lurk in the plan. My favorite Aerosmith album is probably Rocks. Everybody talks about Toys in the Attic, which has my favorite song, Walk This Way. But, to me, Rocks is the greatest Aerosmith album. Toys in the Attic is up there. Pump is fantastic. Get a Grip, Just Push Play. But to me, it's certainly Rocks. There's not one bad song of that album. But hidden liabilities lurking in the plan. Some plans look fine on the surface. They got a decent fund lineup, all the good providers out there, and no complaints. But just because you don't hear the screech of feedback doesn't mean everything's in tune. And there are a lot of times where just like you find these mistakes that happen. Testing was done incorrectly. Census information was put out incorrectly. And, if the plan hasn't had some sort of review in the past, 2 years, it's really overdue. You have to ask the plan providers about their work. You got to find out. Silence doesn't mean satisfaction. And most participants don't complain until it's too late. Same thing with plan sponsors. They don't know the problem until it's too late. DOL, enforcement, litigation. Department of Labor is out there. They've been more active in the past, 10, 15 years than they've ever been. Late deferrals, missing participants, all this kind of stuff, failing to monitor providers, whatever it is. The Department of Labor is out there, and they can really land a plan sponsor into a whole host of trouble. And it's not just for late 5500s. Right now, I have a client. I'm gonna have to sit down and talk to them. Missing contributions, no bonds, all that kind of stuff, and we got to fix it immediately. So I have a call, I think, next week with the Department of Labor. First week of September. Walk This Way, the road to fiduciary success. I didn't start off with an ERISA practice. This is just what led me. People ask me all the time, why did you get into ERISA? Well, it's the first job I got. I worked for an attorney I worked as an attorney for Harvey Berman, started at $35,000 a year. We had this law firm called Berman, Sussman and Forsetter, and these three guys were the partners in a failing TPA known as Mobius Tech, and then within a year they sold that business to CBiz. But I built my practice back in 2010. I couldn't do the law firm thing anymore. Read it in Full Circle, available on Amazon.com. And I really saw firsthand what lack of fiduciary oversight can do to plans, and I really wanted to focus on helping plan sponsors out, charging a flat fee and all that kind of stuff. And I think plan sponsors need to understand that the decisions they make affect plan participants and affect them. It really takes effective, you need leadership. You can't just drop the ball. It's not really complicated. You need to be engaged as a plan sponsor. You need to be deliberate. Everything you do has to be for a reason. You need to push play. You need to stop making excuses as to why things didn't get done. Stop delaying decisions and start acting like the fiduciary your participants need you to be. Some final thoughts. If you're the plan sponsor, your fiduciary duties are not optional. They're not passive. These are mandatory things. You can't just say, well, listen, I'm not going to go in for that. This wasn't part of the bargain. It's a lot to unpack here, and I just don't have the time for it. You don't need to be perfect in your job as fiduciary. You need a process that you will follow. You need documentation. You need good intentions. You got to push play. You got to take action. Don't let your plan become a cautionary tale in the next Department of Labor press release. As Aerosmith once said, or Steven Tyler, you ain't seen nothing till you're down on a muffin. I still don't know what that means, much like many of the words to Walk This Way. But, if you don't get serious about your fiduciary duty as a plan sponsor, you're going to be crying, and that's not just a power ballad with Alicia Silverstone video. If you need help, that's why people like me can be hired. And those are the takeaways. Like I said, I've always wanted to do an Aerosmith episode, and I finally did it. I think I've done, an Airplane episode once, and Godfather, and all that kind of stuff. So nice to talk about Aerosmith. And of course, Walk This Way is still my favorite Aerosmith song. And, Eat the Rich is probably number 2. That's on the Get a Grip album. But that's it for this week's episode of that 4K podcast. Always try to keep it to like 20 minutes, maybe 2 minutes more. Now we'll be a little bit less than 20 minutes. You can go on and on and on, but people got lives, and they may not have like an hour to hear you. But anyway, I hope you enjoyed this episode of that 4K podcast. Full circle, the album the book and the Kindle book, the paperback, available on Amazon.com. And of course, that 401ksite.com free event. That would be that 401k National Virtual Conference at the end of January 2026. And of course, we'll hopefully have some ideas of where we want to go for 2026 in the live event department. And tune in next week for another fun-filled episode of that 401k podcast. Take care. Bye.